This episode is brought to you by Ovnio, the social TV network. Tich Chingombe, welcome to Back Cover News. How are you?
I'm awesome, Benga. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. All the way from Queensland. Hope you had a safe flight.
Oh, yeah, it was nice and 2 hours, but nothing I can't handle.
Yeah, absolutely. You're here today, of course, to discuss Labor's controversial Deportation Bill.
Yep. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we can get involved in the process, because we all know that there was a lot of backlash around it, and I had to do something about it. I think having done the petition, and that's how we kind of...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So just for those at home, so Labor introduced its controversial Deportation Bill in federal parliament last month.
Yeah.
It passed the House of Representatives, but it hasn't been voted yet in the Senate. This controversial bill has three key provisions. Yeah. One is that the immigration minister would be given essentially extreme powers to direct a person to facilitate their own removal from Australia by submitting applications for travel documents, attending interviews, and providing information despite any fear of persecution in that person's home country. If they don't comply with that, they face a mandatory minimum sentence of 12 months in jail and up to 5 years, and fines of up to $93,000. The bill also allows the minister to essentially blacklist entire countries, including Zimbabwe, which is where you're from.
Yep.
This means that all people from these designated countries may be banned from coming to Australia, with some exceptions for immediate family members and those seeking resettlement through the humanitarian program. The countries which could be blacklisted, as I just mentioned, include Zimbabwe,
Yep.
South Sudan, Iran, Iraq, and Russia. The argument is that these countries don't accept citizens who have been deported from Australia, and the government hopes a travel ban could force them to back down. Critics, including Greens spokesperson for Immigration, Senator David Shoebridge, have strongly condemned the bill, essentially calling it Trump-like and systemically racist.
Yep.
I guess my first question, because you've obviously created this change.org petition which calls for the bill to be scrapped. Why did you want to create this petition?
Well, just to give a bit of context, I've been in Australia since 2005, and on arrival, this is during the Howard government, and we had Kevin Andrews. So Kevin Andrews had refugees that he refused to bring into Australia. We had his outspoken views on the Arabs, that how they should dress, and basically being discriminatory on their cultures and values. And then we also talk about the fact that he was very concerned about the Sudanese, which is a group that's on the list, and he was very much divided the country around the fact that he expected people to come into Australia based on their race.
Right.
And it's evident in the fact that he said these sentiments in 2005, and by the time we got to 2008, immigration, humanitarian people were brought in. It went down by 70%. 70% is a very large number, and this is all based on one person not following any of the international laws, not following the 1958 Immigration Act, and giving the power to one person. And we've got the courts. We've got all these other pathways that we can use. Why aren't we using them?
Yeah.
So for me, and the fact that I'm directly concerned with the fact that I'm Zimbabwean, I did the right thing to come here. So that generalization to the fact that we're going to ban a whole country because of 5 or 6 bad apples, I think Australia is in a high place where they're respectable in terms of they should go to the right and do the right thing, and go through the court systems and all these other available avenues to deal with this, instead of using a bill and giving the power to one person to make a decision. And for me, those decisions look more political than anything else.
Absolutely. And your petition currently has nearly 800 signatures. What are some concerns that you're hearing from the Zimbabwean community with regards to this bill, and how would it impact, people who are legitimately seeking asylum and, migrating lawfully
for
valid reasons.
Yeah, and I probably firstly I want to mention that we're not saying that everyone has done the right thing. So we're saying that there's a group of people who've come here the right way. I myself, for an example, I came as a student, I ended up getting my permanent residence, but there's processes to that.
Yeah.
And if I've come and I've done the right thing, we're 40,000 Zimbabweans, and most of them have done the right thing. But the problem is we have to look at the situation that there are people who are not going to do the right thing, and we have to find out the reason why they haven't done the right thing and put in measures to support them to do the right thing. So if we're saying that it can't be done, what other avenues can be followed from a procedural perspective, fairness perspective, and if they're going to be deported, that they should be deported on the basis of that one person and not on the basis that we've got a good relationship with Zimbabwe, Australia and Zimbabwe have got a good relationship or not. We should use the courts, and each person should be judged on the evidence that they've brought and the procedural fairness. And from that aspect, we're going to be in a situation where things are going to be fair across the board, and not just the fact that you're a Zimbabwean or you're an Indian or you're a Fijian coming from here. We should have the same procedural fairness across the board.
Absolutely. Yeah. And from a human rights perspective, what provisions of the legislation do you find most concerning? I look at it, for example, and I see a mother who's from Iran, may be concerned about the welfare of herself and her children, going back to a strict regime back there. And so essentially this bill says that if she doesn't comply with Australia, requests for whether it's to fill out a passport, for example, she could face jail time. I mean, that seems quite inhumane. Do you agree?
It definitely is. And this is where I was saying that each case should be looked at individually. And there has to be some context in understanding why certain people behave the way they do, and then look at the evidence around it. So we've got a situation where we're talking about Iran, we're talking about certain things that happen that are against women in that country. And as Australia sits on the United Nations, and they are a signatory to human rights, and they need to understand that this woman being in Australia, and they have a right to protect her. So we have to look at a situation where if another person came from another country where she wasn't in the same situation, that person can't be judged on the same aspect. And we need to look at these things from an individual perspective. I'll keep reiterating that because having a minister just go, I don't like Iraq, and then just painting that woman for the fact that she came from Iraq, she's not being given the procedural fairness. And from a humanitarian aspect, that is a very big bias that we should move away from. And the main thing for me is not to give a minister that much powers. And I'll go back to Kevin Andrews. We should use Kevin Andrews as a measuring barometer to say this is what happens when you give a minister so much power. And why shouldn't we use the courts? That's what the courts are there for. That's what all these procedures are for, and that's what all these other bodies are there for. And I think that's the way they should go about looking into these things.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you view the potential impact on bilateral relations between Australia and Zimbabwe, given the complex history?
Unfortunately, the relationship between Zimbabwe and Australia has always been based on the fact that there's been issues around human rights. Zimbabwe's regime is very repressive, and they've won the elections on controversial reasons, and there was a lot of violence that was involved. We're looking at around 2008, and it built such a situation where the Zimbabwean government doesn't like meddling of any outside people, and anything that's said against them, they take it in such a way that they don't want to be ruled by another regime. But what happens is it influences people, it influences other countries to look at the people from Zimbabwe in that country, and they're the ones who suffer regardless of whether they've got a good relationship between the two countries. My take on it is we need to look at it from a situation to say, yes, you've got a bad relationship with the country, but you've got 40,000 Zimbabweans in Australia, and what do they have to say about it as well? So besides talking to the governments, we also have to have a say in, I've chosen to come to Australia, 40,000 Zimbabweans have chosen to come to Australia. What is their take? Are they putting into Australia? Are they working? Are they being too dependent on the Australian system? If we are building the economy, we're hardworking, we're participating in our communities, why should it be affected by the relationship that you have with the government? And it goes back to why I was saying that most of this is more political than it is anything to do with humanitarian issues or procedural fairness.
Absolutely. And the bill seems to target predominantly black and brown countries.
Yep.
Is it discriminatory?
Definitely is. And for me, if you want to have a look at, I'll go back to Kevin Andrews again, because he had so many scandals across between 2001 and 2007, and if we learn from there that most of the things that are being, we say Australia is an inclusive country, right? And if they're an inclusive country, why then is it such a big issue to want people to change? One, technically speaking, Australia is built on different groups of people.
Yeah.
There's only one original group of people in Australia, and everyone has come out. So for us to be in a place where we have to live together, we need to understand each other and respect the fact that we're different. But then we need to use certain aspects of the law to protect each other from even especially the vulnerable groups. Instead of looking at Zimbabwe as, oh, there's something that they're doing, we need to also look at the fact that Australia has got good relationships with other countries. Why do they have good relationships with those other countries?
Yeah.
And then look at why they've got bad relationships with the countries that they're talking about, and use the good relationships as a way of building the same type of relationships across the board, because this is picking and choosing who you like and who you don't like, and taking away all those aspects about why we have courts, why we've got human rights laws, why we've got procedural fairness. All those things are there to protect vulnerable groups of people.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, very well said. And what are some long-term strategies that the government could consider to address the migration concerns while also protecting human rights?
My take on it is Australia is doing it with other countries.
Okay.
What are they doing with Anglo-Saxons? What are they doing with other people coming from other countries? I'll give you a perfect example of India. They've got a very good relationship with India because it's a big tech country. They've got a good trading relationship with them. And migration from India, what's influencing that migration for them to come here, and why do they have such a good relationship with Australia?
Yeah.
So that for me should be a measuring barometer to say they can do it. They've been doing it. So why all of a sudden would you look at such countries which are bringing in small numbers of people? And it goes back to that issue around the politics of it. If you're saying that the politics is a problem, why don't we go into these countries and have diplomacy with them? They've got a consulate in Zimbabwe. That consulate in Zimbabwe, those people are collecting information from NGOs and, understanding the statistics and the reasons why Zimbabweans are in a situation where they are, that they'd want to come to Australia and then overstay. We're not denying that people are overstaying, but we're looking at why would someone want to stay, and why would they not want to go back? And then for you to want to force that person to go back to Zimbabwe and not look at a situation to say, if Zimbabweans are so vulnerable, 2008 they were that vulnerable, why still would you insist for them to go to a place which is dangerous? Don't you have a duty of care under the United Nations, having been a signatory, to look after these people? And considering Zimbabweans are hardworking, and we are not rotting the system. I came here as a student, worked my way up to owning a business, but that was because of the values that come with Zimbabweans. We were colonized by the British. We speak English well. There's things like IELTS test. For me, an IELTS test isn't something that it's a deterrent. It's not to say that they can't speak English. And if you want to prove that, we were writing British exams. So for you to tell me to write an IELTS test to speak English. I can guarantee you, we wrote an IELTS test here. Very few Australian people would pass that test. So to me, that's a deterrent. And we need to be honest with each other when we're on the table to say, how can we fix these situations outside of politics and put them in the community, go back in the communities. I've written a petition because I'm concerned. Put us on the table with someone. Listen to our stories, our lived experiences, and those are the people who can fix these problems than throwing them into parliament to people who don't understand where we're coming from. And I think that's the best way that we can deal with it from a community perspective before we go all the way up to parliament.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We contacted the federal government and a Department of Home Affairs spokesperson said, Australia makes every effort to cooperate with countries in the context of the return to their home country of their nationals who have exhausted all avenues to remain in Australia. The bill includes a number of exemptions for family and humanitarian visa applicants for Australia, as well as ministerial exceptions. And you can read their full statement on backcovernews.com. Are the government's concerns valid?
It's a two-pronged question, because we can say yes and we can say no. They are concerning. My issue is not the fact that what the issue is, it's around who they're targeting.
Right.
They're targeting a specific group of people. When you create a law should protect a whole group of people and not discriminate a specific group of people. So the Deportation Bill should be looked at from an aspect to say, when we implement these things, they should be implemented across the board and not look at it from a perspective to go, let's create something, but it's specifically for this group of people. But if it was a genuine bill, it wouldn't have been rushed. It would have been put in through the communities, through different aspects of bodies to look at all the legitimacy around the bill. So the fact that we're sitting here talking about it meant there was some issues that were raised, and the reason why it wasn't passed was the very reason we're having the conversation. So my take on it is that the government is looking at it from a political perspective, and they're trying to push through things that will help them to fast track and to maintain their political stance on certain countries. And they've been doing it for a long time. They don't have a good relationship with Zimbabwe from a long time. Right. And Zimbabwe's got a stance on certain things, Australia's got a stance on certain things. But the thing is, there are people involved, us and 39 other thousand Zimbabweans who are in Australia. We can't punch from wherever we are, but the thing is, we're still affected. We have to go home, and we come from Australia with our Australian passport, and the guy's looking at us going, you're the people who say all these things about us, but we still need to come back to Australia. So it affects us what happens in Australia, it affects us what happens in Zimbabwe. And the bottom line is, we are the people who can sit on the table with both groups of people and explain to them what's affecting us, and looking at the way the laws can be created. They can create these laws that can help us for both countries to work together, but they choose not to because it doesn't benefit them. If we're in a situation, and this is where I always talk about numbers, if we had Anglo-Saxons having problems and who can make up to about 5-6 million as an MP or as a party, it would definitely affect them the way they raise it. But because it's affecting, how many are Sudanese and Zimbabweans? We're probably less than 60,000 to 100,000. And it wouldn't matter, it wouldn't show on the numbers. So it doesn't affect them. And that's why they can sit with their suits and say all these fancy things that affect us. So it goes back to the point, let's look at it from a perspective. Take away the politics, put it back in the courts, put it back into procedural fairness. Let's follow the human rights, and we'll have better outcomes outside of that.
Absolutely. Let's hope that the government reconsiders, because this bill could have devastating impacts around the world.
Oh, definitely. And for me, Australia has to be careful where they sit, because one, they want to be this big power, but then at the same time they want to do these things, and they need to be honest where they sit in the international community. And when the eyes are watching on them, they have to set the bar very high, not just for their region, but also for themselves as individuals, to say we believe in human rights, we believe in following the right procedures, and in this aspect they're not doing a good job.
Absolutely. Tich Chingombe, it's been a pleasure and very insightful. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Appreciate you.
All right.